The bidding started at $5. Ruth Mast stood in the center of Laramie's main street, January wind cutting through her wool dress like it had a grievance against her specifically, and listened to Elder Baylor tell the small crowd of men that she was, and she heard him use this word carefully, deliberately, the way a man uses a word he has tested before, troubled. She did not look up, not because she was afraid. She had moved past afraid the way you move past a town you will never return to. You see it, you note it, and then it is behind you. $5. That is what repentance costs in this world. $5 and a word no one will argue with. A man in a brown coat laughed. Another spat into the snow. The elder's voice continued, smooth, reasonable. The voice of a man who had spent 40 years being believed, explaining that the girl had suffered a kind of break, that her mind had turned on her, that her family only wished to see her safely placed. She was 36 years old. She had spent 36 years waking before dawn, baking bread that fed other people's children, sewing quilts for other people's marriages, burying her questions so deep inside herself that she had almost forgotten she used to have them. Almost. You told the truth. You said what you saw, and this is what the truth costs. $3. Someone had lowballed. The elder did not flinch. She looked up then, not at Byler, not at the men with their coins, at the sky, flat and white and indifferent, the kind of sky that does not care what happens beneath it. She had always found that strangely comforting. The sky never pretended. She was still looking at the sky when the crowd shifted. She felt it before she saw it. The particular silence that falls when something larger than the situation walks into it. Boots on frozen ground. Slow. Unhurried. The sound of a man who has nowhere to be and nothing left to prove. He was not what she expected. No one ever is, when they are real. He stood at the edge of the crowd, big, weathered, a jaw that looked like it had been carved from the same rock as the mountains behind him, and he looked not at the elder, not at the crowd, but at her, directly, the way people had stopped looking at her approximately 36 years ago. She did not look away. He said one thing to the elder. She did not hear the words. She heard only the tone, flat, final, up the tone of a statement rather than a question. And then he was moving through the crowd, and the crowd was parting, and Elder Byler's smooth voice had stopped. She picked up her bundle from the ground. It was not heavy. Everything she owned in the world weighed less than a winter coat. He didn't speak to her. He walked, and she followed, not because she trusted him, not because she had any reason to, but because every other direction led somewhere she had already been. His wagon was at the end of the street. Before she climbed up, she saw it, the door behind the wagon seat, where he'd stowed supplies, a chain around the handle, not a lock to keep people out, a lock to keep something in. What does a man alone on a mountain need to keep locked away? She climbed up. She did not ask. Behind her, she heard Elder Beeler's voice resume, softer now, speaking to someone still in the crowd. She did not turn around. She had learned long ago that whatever is said behind you is meant to follow you. She was done being followed. Where in the world are you listening from right now? Drop your city in the comments. Every time I see them come in, I'm reminded that some stories find exactly the people who need them. The town disappeared behind them in less than a mile. That was the thing about Laramie in January. It did not hold on to you. The wind came down from the mountains and erased everything. Footprints, voices, the smell of other people. Within minutes, there was only white, and the sound of the horses breathing, and the particular silence of a man who had decided long ago that words were something to be spent carefully. She sat on the far edge of the wagon seat, as far as the wood would allow. Measure the distance. Keep the distance. You know what happens when you stop measuring. She had not eaten since yesterday morning. She did not mention this. Hunger was a manageable problem. She had a long list of manageable problems, and she had learned to work through them in order, one at a time, the way you work through a field, row by row, head down, until it is done. He had not told her his name. She had not asked. The mountains ahead were the color of something permanent, gray and white and utterly indifferent to the small wagon making its way toward them. She had never been this far west. The Amish settlement sat in a valley 2 days' ride from here, folded into the landscape like something that did not want to be found. She had lived her entire life within its borders. 36 years. The same roads, the same faces, the same silence that was never peaceful. It was enforced. She watched his hands on the reins. Large, scarred across the knuckles, the kind of scarring that comes not from one event, but from years of hard use. He held the leather loosely, the way a man holds something he has held so long it has become part of the weight of him. He had not looked at her since they left town. She told herself that was fine. She did not need to be looked at. She needed to be somewhere that was not the middle of Laramie's main street, with Elder Byler's voice in her ears. They rode for an hour before he spoke. "Abel Crane," he said. Not an introduction exactly, more like a piece of information he was providing in case it became useful. She waited a moment. The wind moved through the pines at the road's edge. "Ruth Mast." He nodded once, as though this confirmed something. Another mile passed. The road began to climb. "You hungry?" "Don't say no. You have been saying no your entire life to things you needed because wanting was considered a kind of pride. Look where that got you." "Yes," she said. He reached behind the seat without looking and produced a cloth bundle, bread, hard cheese, 2 strips of dried meat. He set it on the seat between them and returned both hands to the reins. She ate without speaking. So did he, when she passed the bread back. It was the most honest meal she could remember. As they were passing through the edge of town, the last cluster of buildings before the mountain road opened up, when she saw the woman outside the dry goods store stop and stare, not at Abel, at her. The woman leaned toward the man beside her and said something behind her gloved hand. The man looked, then looked away the way people look away from things that make them uncomfortable, quickly and with effort. There it is. You have not been gone 3 hours, and already you are a story someone is telling. Ruth faced forward. She knew how these stories worked. She had watched them built before, back in the settlement. A word here, a concern there, the architecture of reputation assembled by people who would never say anything directly to your face. Elder Byler was good at this, or he had been doing it for 40 years, and he had never once needed to raise his voice. A man on horseback came from the opposite direction, slowing as he passed the wagon. He nodded at Abel, then his eyes moved to Ruth, to her white cap, her plain dress, the bundle on her lap that was everything she owned, and something shifted in his expression. Not unkind, but noting, filing away, He will remember you. He will mention you. By tonight, half this town will know a plain woman rode up the mountain with Abel Crane. She did not know yet what that meant for her. She did not know yet what Abel Crane meant for her. She knew only that the road ahead climbed into snow and pine and silence. And that silence, real silence, not the enforced kind, was the only thing she had wanted for longer than she could name. The horse climbed steadily. Somewhere behind them, in a town that was already forgetting the shape of her, a smooth voice was still talking. She did not know what it was saying. She told herself it did not matter. You have told yourself that before, about things that mattered very much. It is easy to stand in a crowd and say nothing. It costs nothing. But ask yourself, if you had been standing on that street today, in the cold, watching, what would you have done? Not what you wish you would have done. What would you have actually done? That distance between those two answers, that is where most of our regrets live. The mountain did not care about her story. That was the first thing she noticed, truly noticed, the way you notice something that has been absent so long you forgot it was possible. The pines did not lean away from her. The snow did not arrange itself to make her passage harder. The rock faces rising on either side of the road held their positions with the complete indifference of things that had been standing long before Elder Byler was born and would be standing long after his voice finally ran out of people to convince. No one up here knows what you are. No one up here has decided yet. She held that thought carefully, the way you hold something fragile you are not sure belongs to you. The road narrowed as it climbed. Abel slowed the horse without being asked. The animal knew this terrain the way it knew its own breathing, adjusting its weight, choosing its footing on the ice-edged stones with a patience that seemed almost deliberate. Ruth watched the horse's ears, forward and steady, not nervous. She had always trusted horses more than people. They could not decide to lie. An hour above the tree line, Abel pulled the wagon to a stop. She tensed, the old reflex, quick and quiet, the body's private language for assess, prepare, do not show it. But he only climbed down and checked the left rear wheel, crouching in the snow, running his thumb along the spoke with the focused attention of a man who understood that small problems on flat ground become catastrophic problems on a mountain. He stood, packed snow away from the axle with his boot, and climbed back up. He had not explained. He had not needed to. He fixes things before they break. File that away. You don't know yet if it means anything. They continued. The wind picked up as the tree cover thinned. A different kind of wind than the town wind, cleaner. Ice without the smell of smoke and coal and too many people living too close together. It bit hard, but it bit honestly. She pulled her shawl tighter and did not complain because there was no one to complain to and because cold, like hunger, was a manageable problem. Then Abel said, without preamble, without turning his head, "Settlement's Byler's, that right?" She looked at the space between the horse's ears. "He founded it 18 years ago." A pause. The wagon creaked over a frozen rut. "You been there the whole time?" "I was born there." He said nothing, but something in the set of his shoulders changed. A fractional shift, a small recalibration, the kind a person makes when a number lands differently than they expected. She did not ask what he was thinking. She had learned not to ask men what they were thinking. The answers were rarely worth the asking. They were 20 minutes from the cabin. She did not know this yet, but the horse did, its pace lifting almost imperceptibly. When she saw it, a single set of boot prints in the snow, parallel to the road, not on it, following the tree line where the shadow was deepest, where a person on the road would not naturally look unless they already knew to. Recent, the edges still sharp. Someone walked this line today. Someone who did not want to be seen walking it. She looked at Abel. He was already looking at the tree line. He had seen it before she had. He said nothing. He did not change his pace, but his right hand moved from his knee to the seat beside him, closer to where she now understood something was stored beneath the canvas. He is not surprised. He recognized this, which means this is not the first time. The boot prints continued alongside them for another 100 yards, then stopped at the base of a rocky outcropping where the snow was disturbed, packed down, turned over. Someone had stood there for a while facing the road. Then nothing, gone into the rocks where the wind had already begun filling the impressions in. Abel's hand stayed where it was until the cabin came into view around the last curve. Low, solid, smoke already rising from the chimney as though the place had been expecting them, and only then did he move it back to the reins. He still said nothing about the prints. She did not ask, but that night, lying in the small room he had prepared without explanation, listening to the wind test the walls, she stared at the ceiling and thought about the careful distance between what a person shows and what a person knows. He is keeping something from you. The question is whether he is keeping it from you specifically, or whether he is simply a man who has learned to carry things alone. You know what that looks like. You have been doing it your entire life. The cabin was smaller than the church hall she had cleaned every Saturday for 20 years. She noticed this the way she noticed most things now, without reaction, simply recording. Small, one main room, a stone fireplace taking up most of the north wall, a table with 2 chairs that did not match, shelves holding flour, salt, dried beans, a row of tools hung with the same care most people reserve for things of value, a door to a back room, closed, another door, smaller, to what she understood was where she would sleep. He had prepared it, not elaborately, not with any gesture toward comfort beyond the functional, but the room had been swept, the narrow bed made with a wool blanket folded at a precise right angle at the foot, a candle stub set in a tin holder on the small shelf beside it. Someone had done these things intentionally, someone who knew before today that there would be a person sleeping here. He knew, before he came down to town, he already knew he was going to bring someone back. She set her bundle on the bed and stood in the middle of the small room and looked at the candle. Or he always keeps it ready, because hope is a thing some people cannot stop practicing even when they have excellent reasons to. She did not know which was true. She did not know enough about Abel Crane to know which version of him was more likely. She knew only that the bed was made and the room was swept, and no one had done that for her in longer than she could calculate. The first morning established the shape of things. Abel woke before she did. She heard him moving in the main room, the low sound of the fire being fed, the particular rhythm of a man who has performed the same actions in the same order for long enough that they have become a kind of silence themselves. By the time she came out, the coffee was made. He poured a cup and set it on the table without looking up from the harness he was mending. She sat. She drank. She did not thank him, not from rudeness, but because it felt strange to thank someone for treating her like a person who deserved coffee in the morning. You should not have to thank someone for that. You know this. You have always known this. You just stopped saying it. He left for the barn after that. She washed the cups, found the broom, swept the floor he had already swept yesterday. Then she stood in the middle of the room and looked at the shelves and the fireplace and the two mismatched chairs and thought about what to do next. In the settlement, every hour had been assigned: waking, prayer, bread, children's lessons, the garden, the sewing circle, the evening prayer, sleep. The structure had been suffocating, and she had hated it with a quiet hatred she had never named until now. She had not understood until this moment that the structure had also meant she never had to decide what she was for. What are you for, Ruth? Outside of what you were assigned to be? She did not have an answer. She started on the bread. By the end of the first week, a shape had emerged between them. Not friendship, not yet anything with a name, but a pattern. He worked outside. She managed inside. They ate at the same table. He spoke when there was something to say. She answered when she had something to answer. It was the least performative existence she had ever lived. She had not understood until now how much of her life had been performance. The right expression at the right moment, the right degree of deference, the careful calibration of how much space to take up in any given room. Here there was no audience. Abel Crane watched her the way he watched the weather, with attention, without judgment, as information rather than assessment. It should have been easier than it was. He looks at you like you are a person. You have forgotten what to do when someone looks at you like that. It was on the 8th day that she found the paper. She was restacking the split wood inside the door. It had rained the night before, and the outer stack was wet, when a folded piece of paper fell from between two logs. She picked it up. The handwriting was not Abel's. She had seen his handwriting on the harness tags, large and deliberate. This was smaller, slanted. 3 words: "She is found." She stood with it in her hands for a moment that lasted longer than a moment. From outside. Someone put this here from outside, which means someone has been close enough to touch the woodpile. She looked at the door, the latch, the single window above the sink, its shutters closed but not barred. He does not know, or he knows and has not told you. Either way, you are not as far from Laramie as you thought. She folded the paper along its original crease. She went to the fireplace. She held it over the flame until it caught, then set it in the coals, and watched it become nothing. When Abel came in for the midday meal, she gave him his plate and sat across from him and ate her own food and said nothing about the paper or the woodpile or the 3 words that were now ash. She had learned very early that the things you could not fix were best kept where they could not be used against you. But her hand, when she lifted her fork, was not entirely steady, and she thought, not yet, not until I understand what this place is, not until I know if it is safe enough to tell the truth in. She had told the truth once. She knew exactly what it had cost. The snow came back on the 11th day. Not the polite snow of early winter. This was the kind that meant business, the kind that arrived before dawn and by mid-morning had buried the fence posts to their crossbars and turned the world outside the windows into a moving wall of white. Abel came in from the barn, stamping his boots, ice in his beard, and looked at the sky through the window the way a man looks at something he has negotiated with before and lost. "We're not going anywhere for 3 days," he said, "maybe 4. "Good," she thought, and was immediately surprised by the thought. When did staying become good? She turned back to the stove and did not answer. The enforced closeness of a blizzard does something to the architecture of silence between two people. It either expands the silence until it becomes unbearable, or it changes its quality, becomes less like a wall and more like a room two people are learning to share. By the second day, she had learned the particular sound of him thinking, a slight exhale, the way his hand stilled on whatever he was working on. Harness, axe handle, the perpetually rebellious hinge on the supply cabinet, before they resumed. She had learned that he drank his coffee in 3 long intervals, and that he always left a quarter cup in the bottom, and that this was not absent-mindedness, but preference, as though finishing completely was a thing he was cautious about. She had learned that he looked at the locked door sometimes when he thought she was not watching. Never long, never with anything she could name clearly on his face. Just a glance, the way you glance at a wound you have learned to live with, checking without meaning to, the body's involuntary accounting. There is something in there that is costing him. Every day. And he pays it every day without complaint, because he has decided this is the price, and he will pay it. She understood that. She understood it in her bones. On the afternoon of the second blizzard day, she was reaching for the top shelf, the salt, which he kept inexplicably above comfortable reach, when the stool she was standing on shifted on the uneven floor, and she grabbed the shelf edge, and the shelf gave slightly, and 3 tins came down, and Abel was across the room before she had processed that he had moved. His hand closed around her arm, not grabbing, steadying. The difference was significant, and she felt it immediately. She was not on the floor. The stool had not gone out from under her entirely. It had been a near thing, not a disaster. But his hand was on her arm, and he was close enough that she could see the exact color of his eyes. Gray, she had thought, but not gray, something more complicated than gray, the color of mountain water in November, and neither of them moved for a moment that had no good reason to be as long as it was. Let go, she thought. He will let go, and you will step down and pick up the tins, and this will not have meant anything. He let go. She stepped down. She picked up the tins. "I'll move the salt," he said. "I'm not short," she said. "The stool is uneven." "I'll fix the stool." "Of course you will," she thought. "You fix things before they break. I know this about you already." She set the tins on the counter and did not look at him, and her heart was doing something she had told it firmly to stop doing, and it was not listening. That night, he built the fire higher than usual. She was sewing by the light of it, mending the hem of her second dress, the only other clothing she owned, and he was at the table with a piece of paper and a stub of pencil, writing something she could not see. The wind outside was theatrical in its violence. The cabin absorbed it the way old solid things absorb pressure, without drama, without yielding. She was almost calm, and then the smell hit her, pine resin and cold air, and beneath it something else. Wool, damp wool, the specific smell of the Gime meeting house after a long winter service when 60 people had been breathing the same air for 3 hours. The smell of every Sunday of her life for 36 years. The smell of the last Sunday, Elder Byler's voice, her own voice, and then the silence of 60 people deciding together that she had not spoken. You were right. You were right, and they knew you were right, and they chose him anyway because he was useful and you were not. Her needle stopped. She sat very still, the dress in her lap, the fire too warm on the left side of her face, and breathed through the memory the way you breathe through pain, steadily, without giving it more attention than it requires, waiting for it to pass. It passed. She became aware that Abel had stopped writing. She did not look up, but she felt his attention the way you feel a change in air pressure. Something had shifted in the room, a quiet redirection of focus, and she understood, without looking, that he was watching her with the same careful non-intrusiveness with which he watched everything he cared about. He noticed. He will not ask. He is giving you the choice. She took a breath. I had a life, she said. To the fire, not to him. Before. It wasn't nothing. I want you to know that. It wasn't nothing. Silence. Then, I know. 2 words. Said the way you say something you mean precisely, without elaboration, because elaboration would dilute it. She looked up then. He had returned to his paper. His pencil was moving again. She returned to her needle. Outside, the blizzard continued its long argument with the mountain. Inside, something that had been very tightly held for a very long time, loosened, just slightly, just at the edges, without her permission and without her acknowledgement, and without, for once, costing her anything at all. The blizzard broke on the 4th morning. She knew before she opened her eyes. The quality of the silence had changed. The wind had stopped its long argument and left behind the particular stillness of a world that has been remade overnight. She lay in the narrow bed and listened to it and thought about how quiet could mean so many different things depending on who was enforcing it. This quiet was not enforced. She got up. Abel was already outside. She could see him through the window, moving between the cabin and the barn, breaking a path through snow that came to his thighs, doing it methodically, without frustration, the way a man does a necessary thing he has done many times before. She watched him for longer than she meant to. You are watching him again. You have been watching him for 4 days and telling yourself it is assessment. It is not assessment anymore. She turned away and put the coffee on. It was mid-morning when he came back inside, stamping snow from his boots, and found her at the table with the small notebook she had asked to borrow. She had wanted to write down what herbs she had seen on the mountain trail, thinking ahead to spring. Thinking ahead being itself a new thing, she had not thought ahead in a long time. He stopped when he saw what was on the table beside the notebook. His notebook. The one with the leather cover. It had fallen from the shelf above the table when she reached for the ink. She had picked it up and set it carefully to the side without opening it, without looking at anything, setting it face down with the same deliberateness with which she did not read other people's letters. He looked at it, then at her. "It fell," she said. "I didn't open it." Something moved through his expression, not suspicion, she realized. Something older than suspicion. Something that looked, if she was reading it correctly, almost like relief. He crossed the room. He picked up the notebook. He stood with it in his hands for a moment, and then, without sitting, without explanation, he opened it and set it on the table in front of her. She looked down. Columns of small marks, grouped in fives, the way men count long numbers when they need to keep track without losing their place. Dozens of columns, hundreds of marks. She understood immediately what they were. The smell of gunpowder and river mud rose up from somewhere beneath her sternum. Not her memory, his, somehow transmitted through the paper, through the careful, terrible neatness of all those marks. Everyone is a person. He has been counting them since the war ended. He has never stopped counting. 14 years, he said. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the marks. I tried to stop, felt like forgetting. He cannot forgive himself enough to put it down, and he cannot put it down enough to forgive himself. And he has been living in that space for 14 years. She did not say, "You were a soldier, you had no choice." She did not say, "You cannot carry this forever." She had been on the receiving end of that kind of comfort, the kind that asks the wounded person to adjust themselves to make the witness more comfortable, and she knew exactly how much it was worth. She said, "Is that why you came up here?" "Partly." "And the other part?" He closed the notebook. He looked at her then, directly, the way he had looked at her in the street in Laramie, the way that had made her not look away. Needed to be somewhere the math was simpler. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. For Ruth Mast, who had spent 36 years learning to occupy as little visual space as possible, 3 seconds was a very long time. "Did it work?" she asked. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, something more honest than a smile. "Some days." She thought about that answer for the rest of the afternoon. Some days, not yes. Not the answer of a man performing recovery for an audience. The answer of a man who had learned to tell the truth about difficult things in the smallest possible increments, because that was the only increment that didn't break something. She recognized it. She had been doing the same thing her entire life, only she had been telling those small truths exclusively to herself, in the dark, where no one could use them. What would it cost to say one true thing out loud? One small one, to someone who has just shown you his. She was still negotiating with herself about this when, near dusk, Abel came in from a final check of the barn and stopped in the doorway. She had lit the lamps, both of them, the one on the table and the one on the shelf she never lit because she had told herself one was sufficient. The room looked different with both lit, warmer, more like a place people lived rather than a place a person waited. He looked at the second lamp. He looked at her. She did not explain. He took off his coat and hung it on the peg and sat down at the table, and she brought him his coffee and sat across from him, and the lamps burned, and outside the snow reflected the last of the daylight, and the mountain was very still. It was the most ordinary moment of her adult life. It terrified her. You are in danger, she thought, not from him, from this, from wanting this to be real, and then, before the thought could finish its familiar work of closing her back down, a sound from outside. Hooves, more than one horse, moving fast for the hour, for the conditions, for a mountain road in the dark. Abel was at the window before she had set down her cup. His hand found the rifle on the wall. He did not take it down, but his hand rested on it, and he looked out into the dark for a long time before the sound faded up the ridge and was swallowed by the pines. He stood at the window a moment longer. Then he came back to the table. He sat. He picked up his coffee. He did not explain. And she understood, with a cold clarity that had nothing to do with the temperature outside, that whatever was coming, it was no longer a question of if. The man arrived on a Wednesday. She knew it was Wednesday because she had been counting days the way she had counted them her entire life, not by calendar, but by task, by the rhythm of what needed doing and when. Wednesday was the day she baked. The cabin smelled of bread when the knock came, and for one disoriented moment the smell and the sound together made her think of home. And then she remembered that home was the thing that had sold her on a street corner for $5, and the disorientation passed. Abel was at the door before the second knock. She stayed at the table. Old training. Stay back, stay small, let the men conduct the business of the door. She hated that she still did it. She did it anyway. The man outside was not Elder Byler. He was younger, 30 perhaps, all with a town coat too thin for the mountain cold and the careful affect of someone delivering a message he has been coached not to editorialize. He handed Abel a folded document. He said something Ruth could not hear. Abel said nothing in return, which was, she had learned, its own kind of answer. The man left. Abel closed the door. He stood with the document in his hands for a moment, not reading it, she realized. He had already read it. He was deciding something. And then he crossed the room and set it on the table in front of her. She looked at it without touching it. Wyoming Territorial Court. Petition for guardianship of person. Her name, her full name, Ruth Ann Mast, in the careful script of someone who had paid a lawyer to write it. Petitioner, Elder Joseph Byler, acting on behalf of the Mast family and the community of... She stopped reading. Guardianship, not return, not even the pretense of family concern. Guardianship, the legal instrument for a person deemed unable to manage her own affairs. He is not asking for you back. He is asking a court to declare you property. Her hands were flat on the table. She was aware of this, the deliberateness of it, the way she was pressing her palms down to keep them from doing anything that would reveal what was happening inside her chest. 14 years, Abel had said about his notebook. I tried to stop. She understood now with a new and specific clarity that Elder Byler had been building this document for 14 years, too. Every woman who had questioned him, every voice he had needed to silence. He had learned across all that time out exactly which words a territorial court would accept and which it would not. He had learned to make the cage look like care. He has done this before, she said. It was not a question. Abel sat down across from her. Sheriff in town mentioned a woman 3 years ago. Different settlement, same. He paused. Same outcome. What happened to her? He looked at her steadily. She didn't have anyone to stand with her. The fire shifted in the grate. Outside, the afternoon light was already thinning. The mountain took the sun early, kept the dark longer. She had learned this about it. You have a document with your name on it, and a man across the table who just told you, in the plainest language he uses, that he intends to stand with you. And you are waiting for the condition. You are waiting for what it will cost. There's more, Abel said. He reached into his coat and produced a folded newspaper, Laramie's Weekly, 2 days old, the ink still sharp. He set it beside the court document. She read the headline, Troubled Woman taken in by mountain recluse, community fears for safety of both. The article was 3 paragraphs. It used the word unstable twice and concerned community 4 times. It quoted Elder Beeler by name. It did not quote Ruth Mast because Ruth Mast had not been asked. She read it twice. Then she set it down very carefully and looked at the wall above the fireplace and breathed. He is not coming for you with force. He does not need force. He has a court document and a newspaper and 40 years of being believed, and he is going to stand in front of a judge and speak in that smooth, reasonable voice, and the judge is going to look at you, large, plain, Amish dressed, no family, no property, no husband. And he is going to look at Byler, composed, community-backed, holding a signed petition. And he is going to make the only decision that makes sense to a man who has never had to be the one people decide things about. The anger came then, not the old anger, the one she had swallowed so many times it had become part of her digestion. Something newer, cleaner. No, just that. Just the word. In the place where she kept the thing she meant completely. She picked up the newspaper. She folded it in half. She set it on top of the court document. "What do I have?" she said, "that he doesn't know about?" Abel looked at her for a moment. The slight recalibration she had learned to recognize. The small adjustment he made when she surprised him. "You were there," he said, "when it happened. Whatever you saw, you're the only one who saw it. My word against his." "Yes." She looked at the folded papers. "Your word. The thing that cost you everything once already. The thing you told the truth with and watched it make no difference at all. He is asking you to use it again. There is a kind of courage no one speaks of. The courage of someone who has lost everything and still chooses, quietly, to feel again. Not because the world deserves it, but because they do." She put her hand flat on the folded papers. "Then we need a plan," she said. They came on a Friday morning, when the light was still low and the snow on the ground was hard enough to hold the weight of horses without breaking through. She heard them before she saw them. The same sound as that night, 2 weeks ago. Hooves on frozen ground, but this time unhurried. This time they were not passing. She was at the window before she fully understood she had moved, and Abel was already at the door, coat on, rifle in his hand, but pointed down, pointed at the floor in the careful way of a man who has decided the first move will not be his. 4 horses. 3 men she did not recognize. Town men, the kind that get paid to stand behind other people's decisions. And Elder Beeler. He looked exactly the same as he always had. That was the thing about men like him. They did not look like what they were. He was 63 years old, silver-haired, and with the careful grooming of a man who understood that appearance was argument. He rode a good horse. He wore a good coat. He looked like someone's grandfather. He looked like someone's grandfather, and he had destroyed her life with a pen and a smooth voice, and she had let 36 years pass believing that the problem was her. No more. Abel stepped outside. She followed. She had not discussed this with him. The following. He glanced at her once, a quick assessment, and then faced forward. He did not tell her to go back inside. He is not surprised. He already knew you would come out. Byler stopped his horse 10 feet from the porch. He looked at Abel first, the professional courtesy of a man acknowledging an obstacle. And then his eyes moved to Ruth. He smiled. Ruth. The voice, smooth, warm, just the voice of a man enormously practiced at sounding reasonable. "We have been worried about you." "We," she noted the word, the way it built a wall of other people around him before he had said anything else. "Elder Byler," she said. Abel said nothing. He stood slightly ahead of her and slightly to the left. Not blocking her, she realized. Flanking her, giving her the center. Baylor's eyes moved between them. He produced the court document from his coat with the care of a man presenting something that does not require force because it is force. "I have a territorial order," he said, addressing Abel now, "for the return of this woman to the custody of her community. I understand you may not have known the circumstances of her departure. I hold no grievance against you, Mr. Crane. This is a matter of a family concerned for the well-being of one of their own." One of the town men shifted in his saddle. Abel looked at the document. He did not take it. "She's not going," he said. Byler's expression did not change. This was, she understood, because he had expected it. He had planned past it. "Mr. Crane, I have 3 witnesses, a signed petition, and a territorial judge who has already reviewed this case. I am asking you not to make this harder than it needs to be. For her sake. For her sake." The words landed in her chest like something physical. For her sake, he had stood in front of 60 people and called her unstable. For her sake, he had sent a document to a court that had never heard her name spoken by her own mouth. For her sake, he had written 3 words on a piece of paper and had it placed in a woodpile so she would find it alone in the cold and understand that nowhere was far enough. Something shifted. Not the anger. The anger had been there for days, clean and ready. Something beneath the anger, something she recognized from a very long time ago, from before she had learned to put it away. Her voice. "I'd like to speak." Byler looked at her, a flicker, so brief, so controlled, of recalculation. "Ruth, I'd like to speak," she said again, louder, not raised, weighted. The difference between volume and gravity. "You have spoken to a judge. You have spoken to a newspaper. You have spoken to this court, and to this town, and to 60 people in a meeting house. I have not spoken to any of them. I am speaking now." Silence. The mountain held it. She stepped forward, past Abel, into the space between the porch and the horses, into the cold, into the open. "You are afraid. Do it anyway. You have done hard things afraid your whole life. The difference is that this time you are doing it for something that belongs to you." "My name is Ruth Ann Mast," she said. "I am 36 years old. I have been a member of this community since I was born into it, and I have never been brought before the elders for any failing of conduct or faith in 36 years, not once." One of the town men was looking at her now, really looking. "I reported what I saw. What I saw was real. What I saw was—" her voice caught, one beat, one only, "a child. And I was not believed because believing me would have cost this man something, and not believing me cost me everything. And he has had 3 years to make the law agree with him before I had a single day to speak for myself." Byler's voice came in, measured, sorrowful. "Ruth, this is exactly the kind of— I am not finished." The horses shifted. One of the town men put a hand on his reins. She had not known that was in her. She had not known her voice could do that. Fill a space, fill a mountain morning, fill the silence that had been enforced around her for 3 decades and crack it open like it was nothing. She turned to the town men directly, not to Byler, to the men being paid to stand behind his decisions. "You don't know me," she said, quieter now, the quieter somehow louder than the shout. "You were handed a document and told a story, and you rode up a mountain in the cold because someone told you it was the right thing. I am asking you, not him, not the court, you, to look at what you are being asked to do here." Silence. Abel had not moved. He was watching her with the same attention he gave the weather. Complete, unguarded, as if he had forgotten to arrange his expression into something less than what it was. The town man on the left, older, a working man's hands on the reins, looked at Byler, then back at Ruth. Then he looked at the ground. It was not victory. It was one man deciding not to be certain anymore. But certainty was the only thing Byler's case was built on. Byler's voice came again, harder now, the smoothness thinning at the edges. "Mr. Crane, I am asking you one final time." "She answered you," Abel said. "4 words, flat, final." The tone of a man who has decided this is where the conversation ends and is prepared to be very clear about what that means. Byler looked at him, a long look, the look of a man measuring distance, measuring cost. He looked at the town man who had looked at the ground. He looked at Ruth, and she looked back. For the first time in her life, without calculating what the looking back would cost her, without arranging her face, without making herself smaller to make the moment easier for everyone else. She looked back, and she did not look away. Byler gathered his reins. "This is not finished," he said. "No," she agreed. "It isn't. But today, it's done." He turned his horse. The 3 town men followed, the older one last. And he did not look at Byler when he turned, which was itself a kind of answer. She stood in the snow and watched them go until the sound of the horses disappeared into the tree line. Her legs were shaking. She became aware of this distantly, the way you become aware of weather that has been happening for a while. Abel's hand came to rest on her shoulder, not grabbing, not steering, just weight, warmth, the specific gravity of someone who has decided to stay. She did not move away. She breathed. You spoke. You used your voice in the open air where people could hear it, and the world did not end. The world is, in fact, still here. So are you. The mountain was very quiet around them. She had forgotten that quiet could feel like this, not enforced, not empty, like something beginning. The bread had gone cold. She remembered it when they came back inside. The loaves she had set to cool before the horses arrived, as sitting on the rack above the stove, patient and indifferent to everything that had happened around them. She picked one up. Still good, still bread. The world had shifted on its axis this morning, and the bread was still bread. She almost laughed. She did not, but almost. Abel put the coffee on without being asked. She sat at the table, not the edge of it, not the careful perimeter she had maintained for the first 2 weeks. The middle, her elbows on the wood, her hands loose in front of her, taking up the space she took up without calculation. He set a cup in front of her and sat across from her, and they drank in the silence that was theirs now. Not empty, not enforced, not the silence of people who have nothing to say, but the silence of people who have said enough for one morning and know the rest can wait. Outside, the afternoon light moved across the snow in long, slow panels. She was looking at the locked door. She had looked at it many times over the past weeks, always briefly, always with the careful incuriosity of a guest who understands certain rooms are not hers to wonder about. But she looked at it now, and Abel followed her gaze, and something passed across his face, quiet and considered. He stood. He took the key from the nail above the fireplace. She had not known it was there, she had not looked. And he crossed the room and unlocked the door and opened it and stepped back. He did not go in. He did not invite her in. He simply opened it and returned to his chair and picked up his coffee. She sat for a moment. Then she went to the doorway and looked in. Small, swept clean. A child's drawings pinned to the wall. Horses, a dog, something that might have been a mountain or might have been a person with their arms out. A wooden horse on the floor, handmade, one ear chipped. A Bible on the small shelf, a woman's handwriting in the margins. She could see it from the doorway, cramped and emphatic, the handwriting of someone who read with their whole self. And on the shelf beside it, a small tin box, lid slightly open, the hinge of a music box catching the light. This is who he is protecting. This is who he has been paying for every day, with that notebook and that key and 14 years of a man who cannot forgive himself for surviving. She came back to the table. She sat. She reached across, not thinking, not calculating, not measuring the cost, and put her hand over his where it rested on the table. He looked down at her hand, then up at her. I'm not going anywhere," she said. It was not a grand declaration. It was the smallest possible true thing she could offer. One sentence, no conditions, no armor around it. His hand turned under hers, slowly, and held on. The fire breathed in the grate. The mountain held them both. She thought about the cap, the white linen cap she had worn every day of her life until the morning she had set it on this table and Abel had said nothing, and she had understood that here she was allowed to decide what she wore and what she did not. She had been saving something for it. She had known without knowing. She reached into her pocket. She set the cap on the table between them. Then she picked it up again, gently, without anger, without ceremony, and crossed to the fireplace and set it among the coals and watched it take the flame. Not destruction. A door closing on something that was finished. The tin music box, faint and far away from the open room behind them, turned its small mechanism in the quiet. She had not lost her way. She had lost herself. And tonight, without announcement, without anyone watching, she had begun, quietly, imperfectly, one true sentence at a time, to find her way back. Was this enough to hold against everything the world would still send their way? She did not know, but she was, for the first time in longer than she could name, willing to find out. Sometimes the world takes everything from us, our home, our voice, our belief that we deserve to take up space. And sometimes, in the place we least expected, we find the one person who never needed us to be anything other than exactly what we are. Ruth did not find herself because someone saved her. She found herself because someone stood still long enough for her to remember she was worth standing for. If this story found you today, I think it found you for a reason. Where in the world are you listening from right now? Tell me in the comments. Every single one of your cities reminds me that these stories travel to exactly the hearts that need them. And stay close, because the next story is about a woman who stopped waiting for permission to begin again. If you believe it is never too late, that one is meant for you.